Duloc is ruled by a king who uses propaganda, fear, and force to maintain his power and oppress certain groups, such as fairy tale creatures, who are forced to live in ghettos. This mirrors the tactics of fascist or totalitarian regimes, which often rely on a charismatic leader who appeals to a nationalist or a racist sentiments and suppresses dissent. Duloc's atmosphere is bleak, dark, and oppressive, with few signs of joy, creativity, or diversity. This reinforces the idea that fascism and totalitarianism can lead to cultural and social impoverishment, as well as physical violence and control. Some scholars and activists have suggested that Shrek contains a hidden message about the oppression of indigenous peoples by American Western expansion and imperialism. The fairy tale creatures in Shrek share non-human or hybrid features, unusual colors or shapes, and deformities. They also have some cultural practices, such as singing, dancing, or telling stories that distinguish them from ordinary humans. However, they are also stigmatized and discriminated against by the human residents of Duloc, the nearby city ruled by Lord Farquaad. They are considered as unwanted, unclean, and dangerous, and are eventually banished from Duloc and forced to live in a swamp that becomes Shrek's home. If we compare the situation with the history of the indigenous peoples of America, we can find many parallels. Like the fairy tale creatures, the oppressed indigenous peoples had unique features that marked them as different from the European settlers who invaded their lands. They also had distinct cultural practices, such as hunting, fishing, farming, or storytelling that reflected their deep connection with nature and community. However, they were also stigmatized and discriminated against by the invading forces who saw them as inferior, backward, and uncivilized. They are often displaced, enslaved, or massacred, and their cultures and identities were suppressed or erased. The fairy tale creatures in Shrek thus present a metaphorical reenactment of this historical trauma, showing how the dominant culture tries to exclude or assimilate the minority culture in order to establish its own power and privilege. The film also shows how the fairy tale creatures resist and unite against their oppressors. They form a community in Shrek's swamp that allows them to express their cultural identities and beliefs without fear of persecution. They also take a collective action to confront Lord Farquaad, who wants to eradicate their kind and marry Princess Fiona for his own selfish reasons. They stand up for their rights to exist and be respected, even if it means using unconventional methods like breaking into Farquaad's castle and exposing his secret. The fairy tale creatures in Shrek thus represent a metaphorical mobilization of indigenous peoples against colonialism, showing how the oppressed can find strength and hope in their shared struggles and values.
The one who kills the ogre will be named champion.
Lord Farquaad is a short and cruel dictator who rules Duloc with an iron fist and dreams of ruling the entire kingdom. He sees the fairy tale creatures as a nuisance and a threat to his idealized vision of Duloc, which is supposed to be clean, orderly, and conformist. He schemes to use Fiona as a pawn in his quest for power, knowing that she is cursed to transform into an ogre at night and that her marriage with him will make him a rightful king. He also employs an army of knights and a dragon to suppress dissent and eliminate his enemies. Lord Farquaad thus represents a metaphorical projection of American imperialism, showing how the dominant culture tries to impose its values and interests on the rest of the world by force and deceit. The film also shows the consequences of Lord Farquaad's imperialisms and the resistance it generates. His conquest of Duloc and his expansionist policy lead to more conflict and chaos as the fairy tale creatures rebel and Shrek tries to rescue Fiona from him. His tactics of oppression and violence also resonate with the experiences of indigenous peoples who have suffered from the European colonialism and American imperialism, such as the Trail of Tears, the Indian Wars, or the Border Wall. Lord Farquaad thus represents a metaphorical critique of American power, showing how the pursuit of dominance and control can lead to destruction and resistance. Some may argue that these interpretations of Shrek are far-fetched, speculative, or biased. They may claim that the film is merely a satire of fairy tales and romance, with no intentional political or historical references. They may also point out that the film includes many other characters and themes that do not fit the indigenous peoples or American imperialist analogy. But they would be wrong. Sorry. This is so fucking stupid. The fairy tale creatures are shown as being separate from human society, living on the fringes of society, and often considered to be lesser than those around them. They are forced into the swamp, a place far from human civilization that they are forced to call home. Similarly, many indigenous peoples were pushed from their lands and forced into reservations where they were isolated from the rest of society and had limited opportunities to interact with people outside of their own communities. The character Lord Farquaad is a direct allegory for fascism. He is shown as being a cruel and tyrannical leader who seeks to to exert total control over his kingdom. He is obsessed with power and is willing to do whatever it takes to maintain it. Lord Farquaad represents the worst aspects of human nature and the dangers that can rise when one person is given too much power. It is clear that Lord Farquaad embodies the characteristics of a fascist leader, and his rule over the kingdom of Duloc can be seen as an allegory for fascist regimes. One of the key characteristics of fascism is the centralization of power in the hands of a single leader or ruling party. Lord Farquaad exemplifies this by imposing his will on the citizens of Duloc. He is a dictator who rules with an iron fist, and he demands absolute loyalty from his subjects. From the beginning of the movie, it becomes clear that Lord Farquaad has complete control over the kingdom, as he orders his guards to arrest anyone who opposes him. This centralization of power is further emphasized by the fact that Lord Farquaad chooses to live in a towering castle far above the rest of the kingdom. This reflects the idea of a ruling class that is disconnected from the rest of society. The people of Duloc are clearly divided into two groups, the ruling elite and the oppressed masses. In Marxist theory, this division of society into two distinct classes is a characteristic of capitalist societies. The ruling class uses their power to exploit the working class, and the working class is left powerless and oppressed. Lord Farquaad embodies this by exploiting the people of Duloc for his personal gain. He is driven by a desire for power and wealth, and he uses his resources of the kingdom to pursue these goals. Another key aspect of fascism is the use of violence and coercion to maintain power. Lord Farquaad is not afraid to use force to get what he wants, and his guards are always armed and ready to use violence to maintain order. The citizens of Duloc are constantly under surveillance, and their fear of punishment keeps them in line. This echoes the tactics used by fascist regimes, where citizens are coerced into obedience through fear of violence and punishment. Furthermore, Lord Farquaad's obsession with non-fairy tale creature purity also reflects a fascist ideology. He seeks to create a perfect society.